All right, welcome into episode 4 of the Bridgeway Beacon Live Cast. Once again, my name is Sonny Saltalamakia. I am the clinical supervisor of adolescent services at Bridgeway Recovery Services. And it's Friday, May 8th, and it's a beautiful day outside. And I am joined in studio, in our virtual studio here, by John Ackley, who is a Outpatient Problem Gambling Counselor with Bridgeway Recovery Services. John, how you doing this morning?
Just fine, sir. Enjoying the weather from the security of my dining room.
Yes, that is a good place to enjoy the weather from inside, not going outside and contaminating the world, right?
Right.
John, real quick, how long you worked at Bridgeway for?
I've now worked, April was 7 years. February was 7 years.
Always as a problem gambling counselor?
No, I started out doing addictions with the corrections, chemical addictions with the corrections department, and started that for the first 2 or 3 years. And then when the possibility came available, I just went over to that and got the training for it, et cetera. Went through the training process and became the only problem gambler we had for a while until we brought on some other staff.
Okay. Was that always something you wanted to do, or was that just kind of something that fell in your lap and you kind of liked it?
It fell in my lap. I had some curiosity about it. I had a supervisor, Tina, who kind of put the bug in my ear that she thought I would be good for it. And I got curious about it. And then the farther I delved into it, just the more and more curious I got as I went.
It's awesome. Sometimes it pays to have a curious mind, right?
Yes.
All right. Well, today, John, you're here to talk about kind of the unusual circumstances that we're in and how that's affected the problem gambling community, because it's affected them a little bit the same and a little bit different than maybe your regular people who struggle with substance use. Is that correct?
Yes, very, very much so. The current circumstances were kind of artificially thrust upon the gambling community, 4 to 5 weeks ago, when the state of Oregon, as a sense of precaution, shut down all Oregon gambling, both at the casinos and through the Oregon gambling system. And so it's kind of like you and I were talking just a few minutes ago. It's if I have a problem with gambling, it's like all of a sudden I have no access to that thing which was very core and central to my coping skills in my life.
Now, some people, John, would say it's a good thing that the problem or the access to gambling shut down, because cold turkey is the best way to quit, right?
Yes, and I would agree with that for some clients. And for some clients, I think, as a matter of fact, I have several on my caseload for whom this has really turned out to be quite the blessing. Mm-hmm. Seeing what life can be like without the specter of that there's gambling on every corner, mm-hmm, looming over their heads. And I've got a certain portion of my clients who have done some fabulous work in the past 4 or 5 weeks, and they're kind of blossoming, if you will.
Yeah. But what's maybe one of the negative aspects of that?
I think one of the negative aspects at this point is there's a number of people who may be struggling with their gambling out there who have this artificial relief thrust upon them. And it's kind of this to some degree, I don't think this says it quite clearly enough, but out of sight, out of mind. So they see themselves not having many triggers because there's no gambling to be had.
Gotcha.
And so because there's no gambling to be had, their triggers have reduced. And so because their triggers have reduced, they think their problem has started to go away. When in fact, as we've seen in other addictions, in other circumstances, the addict within ourselves is just in the back of our head doing push-ups, so to speak, just waiting on the time when it can gamble again. And there have been some circumstances that have come about that are kind of exacerbating that, just because we got the stimulus checks.
Oh, yes.
And so depending on how much I may need that stimulus check, I'm pretty certain there's a certain portion of people at this moment who are just kind of slotting it away and saving it for that rainy day when the gambling opens again.
Okay, that makes sense. And so it's kind of like a false sense of confidence because there's nothing out there to utilize. Okay, that makes sense. All right, John. Well, hey,
Yes.
we asked you to have 3 things that are kind of unique to the problem gambling community and how they're being affected by this. And so I'm going to go ahead and start with number 1.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Oh, me?
Yeah, you're the expert, John.
I thought you were going to read it.
I'm just here for the good looks.
Okay. So I was talking, so one of the first things and one of the things I wanted to just expand upon a little bit, I was talking just a moment ago about the disparity in circumstances and some of it being a relief from gambling. And then for some other people, there's an increased tension around gambling at the moment because all of a sudden this thing was removed from them. Their ability to gamble. Gambling may have been a major coping skill, even if a maladaptive one in their life. And so how am I going to take care of myself, get that need filled with a coping skill if I don't have access to what I've been using as a primary coping skill? And so I've been wondering, and I've experienced with a few clients over the past few weeks, this increased anxiety condition around not being able to access gambling. And then compounding that is the increased anxiety of our current world situation. The increased anxiety of the unknown and the uncertain around not just the COVID disease itself, but financial considerations and work considerations and when will things open and how will things open and what's going to happen to there's this compounding of unknown. And as we know, the human animal really dislikes the unknown more than just about anything else. And so it's really raised the anxiety. And if I don't have access to my primary coping skill, how am I going to deal with that?
And so in the problem gambling community, they naturally have stress and anxiety, and sometimes that's what leads them to have that maladaptive coping skill of problem gambling. And then this situation takes away their access to that coping skill, and then on top of that, increases the stress and increases their anxiety without access to that normal coping skill. Is that correct?
Precisely.
And so are you seeing a lot of clients, or have you heard from clients that maybe they're looking to other maladaptive coping skills? So I'm assuming it's kind of like if they smoked a lot of weed and all of a sudden the weed supply went out, they look to alcohol or something else.
They'd look to alcohol. And I think that's happening for a certain portion of my clients. I've had a number of clients who've tried, because there's a very small amount of gambling still open in the state. But the problem is, depending on the kind of gambling I was doing before, it's just not satisfying.
Yeah.
So I've had a couple of clients kind of experiment with trying to resort to that and expressing how uncomfortable and unsatisfying it was. And I can't say I cried a tear over that.
Sure.
But I do have a number of clients who kind of tangentially, because they're not here to address their alcohol with me, but tangentially they've kind of mentioned that it sounds like their alcohol use has increased significantly. And a couple of them, it sounded like it's been with some not healthy results.
Gotcha. That makes sense. That's good insight, John. I appreciate you sharing that. Number 2, what's the second thing kind of affecting the problem gambling community?
The second thing affecting the problem gambling community is just, and I'm not sure how much folks have taken or spoken about it yet, because there's a lot of unknowns and there hasn't been much information put out. But again, there's no plan yet put out for when, how, and if gambling will open up in the state of Oregon again. And there's a lot of considerations to take into effect, because if you look at the gambling facilities, there are usually 6 machines in very close proximity to each other. They involve touching the machines. And these are all things that go directly against the safe provisions for distancing. It's kind of hard to distance when you're crammed shoulder to shoulder with people and you're touching the screen of the person right before you. Mm-hmm. Touching the buttons, et cetera, so forth. And even people, I've been hearing that some people out there are washing their money kind of thing in effort to reduce transmission. And so
isn't that illegal? Isn't that illegal, John, to wash money?
Only if there's bleach involved.
Yeah.
No. So there's just, I think just from the straight health concerns, I'm not sure, I haven't heard how the state may be considering this, but if I have a gambling problem and that's something that I'm missing terribly, terribly in my life, what risks am I willing to undertake to my health just to engage in gambling? once, once gambling opens back up, and how many provisions will the state have put in place in order to help protect potential clients from the transmission of disease.
Is gambling a disorder, gambling disorder, for lack of a better term, is that something that, as the mind has less time to do it, and as we all know the mind's malleable and stuff like that, and can kind of repair itself, over time, does it ever come to the place where that kind of problem behavior it's not as demanding on the mind, so to say, or is it always kind of there? Is it different than substance use?
In that regard, I would say, how about yes and no? And I'll clarify. To a large degree, it's just like any other addiction, in that I would say it depends on how good a recovery I work. Okay. I have a number of clients who have successfully gone through their recoveries to the extent where they can go into a place, a bar that has gambling or something like that, and not be triggered by the machines over in the corner. But they had to do a lot of work on their recovery in order to get to that point, time, effort, etc., in order to get to that point. And so it is possible to minimize it, to be comfortable, to get to that place where it doesn't have the energy within us that it once had. But what I would stipulate, there's also some differences where gambling is completely unique, different from other addictions, because it's a process addiction. Gambling only happens in the mind. There's no substance. I'm not putting something.
There's no physical addiction to it.
Well, there is, because there is a physical component, because I'm still getting the neurotransmitter hits in my brain. Okay. And I'm developing a tolerance for the neurotransmitters. It's endogenously produced. Okay. And so I'm doing that all within my head off the power of my fantasies of the win. And the complicating factor is those fantasies of the win start to infect all other aspects of my life. So it can really be a deep dive to do that hardcore recovery, to examine all the places where that kind of thinking has kind of molded itself into my life.
Are you saying fantasies of the win? Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
I've always been curious about this, kind of just a side question. Gambling to me seems like, because like when someone's an alcoholic, I don't think deep down they know that one more drink will solve all their problems. But it seems like in gambling, one more pull of the lever can solve all their problems. Is that fantasy of the win?
Oh, Sonny, you just hit on a core aspect of gambling right there in that sentence, because that's true. And that is one thing that makes gambling completely unique compared to any other. If opiates are my thing, I know I can do too many opiates and hurt or harm myself permanently. If I'm an alcoholic, I know too much alcohol can harm me physically, etc. So there's a window of tolerance at any given time. Okay. But you're entirely correct with gambling. And this is part of the problem that makes it so insidious, is the fact that no matter how much pain and damage I have done to myself with my gambling, I may have lost my house, I may have lost my family, I may have lost all these things that matter to me. Nonetheless, the fantasy still, no matter how small, how minute that chance is, there's still that tiniest ghost of a chance that one more pull could save me. And that is a powerful stimulant to keep one engaged in the gambling.
And even just that, just not knowing when they're going to open back up again, when the casinos are going to open back up again, having to lose sight or lose hold of that hope, I imagine is going to be really challenging for a lot of the problem gambling community folks.
I think for some, again, kind of like I was saying, for some folks right now, they have latched on to this period and thrived in the lack of gambling. I think there's other people who are just kind of biting their nails, waiting, trying to get by as best they can until that happens, and trying to deal with the unknown in one way or another as best they can. Again, because there's been no guidance on this whatsoever.
Yeah, that's challenging. All right, John. So we got the false sense of confidence, losing the coping skill, no matter how maladaptive it is, and an increase of stress, and then kind of just the unknown and the fantasies of the win concept. What's kind of the third one you got here for something that's affecting the problem gambling community?
Um, well, let's go directly to when the machines do come back on. Okay. Uh, the state of Oregon needs as its current budgetary process is created, they need the money from the Oregon Lottery. So there's an infinitesimally small chance that they would never turn it back on, because we need the money to balance our budget. And every state is having budgetary issues right now in the face of COVID. So when it comes back on, just picture I've been deprived of something that's central and core to my life for all this time. There's a concern out there amongst counselors that there's going to be a surge, a tidal wave of people going back and reaccessing and having a bunch of distorted beliefs potentially around the odds that the state will be desperate for people to come back to gambling, so they'll shift the odds or this, that, and all the different fantasies and beliefs that affect my perception that I can have a better chance or control the gambling in some way, control the outcomes of the gambling in some way. And so kind of anticipating a surge of people going back to the machines. And because there's been, it's been this artificial vacation away from it. And I may have saved money during this time. I've had a number of people telling me how much money they're saving currently due to the current social distancing and the isolation going on. So it's this perfect wave of, if I've saved a bunch of money and all of a sudden gambling comes open, what am I going to do with that savings? And people potentially perceiving that savings as quote unquote extra money, or even in the example of the checks that we got from the government, free money. Okay, I got free money from the government. Okay, and so all that for a gambler just gets slotted into that internal budget in my mind of that's potential money for gambling, when it could be going towards any other number of things to better my life. And so just trying to put it in people's awareness that these machines will come back on. They're coming back on. It's going to stir up a whole host of feelings and urges within themselves potentially, and to be on guard for those potential feelings and to start addressing, how do I want to deal with that situation now? How can I start to prepare myself for that eventuality now? Even if it be it through enacting money barriers, taking my money and putting it a safe distance from myself in one manner or another, or be it some internal work of working on my coping skills so that I won't be as triggered, etc., or have more coping skills to deal with the urges when they arise.
I can definitely see, John, where counselors would be scared, because, I mean, common sense would say each state has lost a lot of money and spent a lot of money solving this COVID thing. Gambling is a known way to bring in revenue. And you're exactly right. I mean, I never really thought about it before, but that free money, the Trump bucks, so to say, that everybody got, storing it away, and then all the what I keep thinking about is like people walking in saying that machine's been cold, that machine hasn't been pulled in 6 months, it's gonna be hot, that machine will be, or all that kind of stuff. And so
yes,
it's almost like they're just sitting there biding their time, huh?
Yes, and just if I can for just a moment to speak to that belief that the state can that the state might modify the odds in order to promote gambling. They are bound by law to what the odds of payout are across the state. Okay. And the calculation in rough sense goes, for every million bets, the machines on average should pay out 67 cents on the dollar. So it's a 33% tax, if you will. Okay. And so that is something that's by law. And so the state will not be able to alter the odds of the machines. No matter what my belief system might be telling me about that, they will be unable to do that.
Do you think there could be an increase in access to machines because they can't alter the payout, but can they make more machines and just increase access as a way to get more money?
Well, again, not quickly, I don't think, because there's rules and So around the physical machines themselves, the VLTs, video lottery terminals, one, we'd have to buy the machines. That's an expenditure, but also we'd have to alter the rules of where they go. Gotcha. In order to increase the exposure. So that would be I would imagine that would be a process. No, what our concerns are as gambling counselors is expanding into other areas. Just recently, in the past 6 months or so, they opened up sports gambling on cell phones. And that was affected dramatically by this COVID shutdown as well. But what we're having huge, grave concerns about is that they will expand the cell phone gambling in other ways that potentially mimic VLTs or something along those lines. So now I don't have to go someplace to gamble, make it more appealing to others, and I can gamble on my phone anywhere, anytime. That seems more likely and far more insidious and dangerous. That would be, and because we don't have to do an investment in physical machines at that point, we don't have to do an investment in real estate, anything like that. It's something that's available to something or everybody already has in their hand.
Yeah, it's cost effective on both ends. That's a lot of information, John. You're a good guy to talk to. Well, hey,
these are the things that keep me up at night.
I think you've forgotten more information than I've retained in my whole entire life. Well, hey, John, I want to say thanks for coming on the show, man. It's been kind of cool talking to you, and again, kind of going over the three things you kind of brought up: false sense of confidence, the increased tension of having stress and having more stress and having your coping skill removed from you, kind of the unknown of when this thing's going to happen again, when the gambling is going to kick off again, and then also when it comes back, that the need to go spend all this extra money we have and stuff like that. Those are all, yes, they sound pretty unique to that. John, if somebody wanted some help with problem gambling, who can they call? Where can they go? How do they get support for that?
Well, they can certainly call Bridgeway. They can call our main access number and do an intake and ask questions. I'm free to answer questions at any time. They can even come in to see me, no obligation. They don't even have to come in treatment. Just come in for a half an hour if they're curious, or they have questions about themselves or about a loved one even. They can come in and just for no obligation whatsoever and sit down with me for a half an hour to ask questions. And then there's also the Oregon Problem Gambling Hotline, 1-800-MY-LIMIT, or excuse me, 1-888-MY-LIMIT. And that is a state resource. And if somebody's out of the Salem area, they would give a person resources for whatever area they're in. It's there are always counselors on that hotline, so they're experienced people who've been doing this for years and know about the gambling issue and can talk about it.
Awesome. So again, you can call Bridgeway, and Bridgeway's number is 503-363-2021. In fact, it's scrolling on your screen right there. 503-363-2021. You can also call the Oregon hotline for gambling, which is 1-888-MY-LIMIT. Again, that number is 1-888-MY-LIMIT.